Chapter 19, or as I like to call it, United States' Imperial Anti-Colonialism. I know, that's a confusing statement. Hopefully by the end of this video and by the end of your studies, you'll be able to understand what is meant by that. Sometimes this chapter is discussed as, the War of 1898 or the Spanish-American War or America saving Cuba or whatnot, right? But when you really get into the realities of it, the war with Spain that lasted roughly 3 months, and where Americans saw more of their men die from disease and dysentery than Spaniards' bullets, is a much more complicated uh, event, very similar to its counterpart, the U.S. invasion of Mexico in 1846, but that's for another class. Um, so the previous chapter and video, we discussed the fact that the Depression of 1893 really caused a crisis for United States capitalism, and where the federal government had to open up and expand new markets. Or as some businessmen and some politicians said, we need commerce to follow the flag. We need to open up new markets to American products that previously had not been buying our things. And in order to do that, you need gassing up stations for the ships that are carrying them, and you need colonies. You need areas around the world that the United States controls. The problem with that is it's contrary to the American founding. The American founding is that governments derive their powers from the consent of the governed, and that you don't establish colonies and you don't engage in imperialism. You don't subjugate other people to outside foreign rule. That was the basis of the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence. So how might the United States go about acquiring colonies, but not do it, so to speak, right? And that becomes the problem. Um, and the Cuban crisis becomes the solution. So Cuba was a colony of Spain that was located 90 miles south of Florida, still is located 90 miles south of Florida. Um, the Cubans had been wanting independence, like all people want, self-determination, the ability to elect their own government for centuries, right? Um, and so the U.S. press picks up on the plight of the Cuban, revolution, where they're trying to throw themselves off from the yoke of Spanish rule. And these newspapers, primarily the two main newspapers in the United States, one run by Joseph Pulitzer, the namesake of the Pulitzer Prize, and William Randolph Hearst, start picking up these stories about what's going on in Cuba. And to sell papers, they have to sensationalize it. They have to hyperbolize, just have to lie, right? And this is known as yellow journalism. And so one part of the crisis there in Cuba that necessitates a war that is able to get the government to get the people on board with the war is that the media plays a critical role in sort of stirring up this, oh, the poor Cubans, we have to help them like the French helped us, right? So that's one thing that leads to the war, where the government can say, look, we're not doing this to acquire colonies or open up new markets. We're doing it because we got to help Cuba, like we're their big brother here in the Western Hemisphere. The second thing is the blowing up of the Maine. The United States had built up this navy, built up this impressive navy, and we wanted to show it off to the world. It's called the Great White Fleet, right? The pride of the U.S. military at the turn of the century, the pride of Rough Rider Teddy Roosevelt, who was the assistant secretary to the Navy at the time, and to show Spain that we weren't going to stand idly by while they were refusing self-determination for the poor Cubans. We sent the USS Maine, a naval battleship, into Havana, into the harbor there in Cuba. And the Maine blew up, killing over 200 American sailors. And of course, the media blamed it on Spain, right? That coupled with other things that were going on, where the Spanish had called us weak and insulted the president, McKinley, in the DeLome letter, amongst many other things. This led to a declaration of war on Spain. And 3 months later, what some called the Splendid Little War, it was over. And when it was over, Cuba got their independence, sort of. The United States became its protectorate for the next 60 plus years, as a result of the Platt Amendment, and the U.S. acquired Puerto Rico, Wake, Guam, Midway, the Philippines, et cetera, et cetera. The U.S. became what its foundational document, the Declaration of Independence, said that it rejected. It became a colonial imperial power. Um, and the justification for this was that these people who had been under Spanish colonial rule, the Filipinos primarily, were unfit to govern themselves. They were uncivilized savages who needed Christianization and Americanization. They needed democratization. And this is that American exceptionalism that people need to model themselves after us and they can thank us later. But we won't give them that true independence until we think they're ready. And this, of course, takes the United States out into new markets and into a very dangerous area of colonialism, very contrary to its founding beliefs. This is also on the heels of the United States acquiring Alaska from Russia, taking Hawaii, just taking it from the indigenous people that live there under their queen, and the United States' place in the world changes forever. This will necessitate the building of the Panama Canal to find a quicker route from where all the factories were built, were building things, the East Coast, through the Isthmus of Central America into the Pacific. They could dock at our colonies now in Wake and Guam and the Philippines and get to that open door to Asia that had been forcefully opened up by American and European powers just years prior. And businessmen rejoiced as this was a way to secure markets of billions of new customers for their products. And they felt that this would cause the silencing of the calls for socialism and the adoption of government regulation of industries and businesses. But ultimately, what it did was it was a rejection of American principles. And you're going to see through the next chapters how different presidents that inherited this new empire, Teddy Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, Woodrow Wilson, they're each going to deal with this new role, with this new position of the United States subjugating and dominating other people around the world by having them as colonies. You're going to deal with it in different ways. And you will also see in this chapter the anti-imperialist movement. There were plenty of people, for a variety of different reasons, who said this is wrong. We should not be doing this. Some of them were moralistic and idealistic, saying this is against our founding principles, like William Jennings Bryan. And you had others like Andrew Carnegie saying, why are we bringing non-white people into the American sphere? So just flat out racist reasons for not wanting to acquire colonies around the world and bring them into the American empire. So not everybody that was against this was doing it for the right reasons, essentially. But that is, in a nutshell, the focus of this chapter in the War of 1898.